She folded the letter in thirds, pressed the crease flat with her thumbnail, and set it beside his coffee cup where he would find it in the morning. Then she sat back down at the dining table, picked up her fork, and finished her dinner. That was the part no one understood, when she told the story later. Not the leaving, the finishing. Miriam Calloway had been married to Dr. Edmund Fitch for 6 years before she learned that he had never once told anyone at the university that she existed. She discovered this not through confrontation, not through a letter or a confession, but through a faculty dinner in early November, when the wife of a junior professor turned to her over the soup course and said, with complete sincerity, "And how long have you been in the city? Are you visiting Edmund for long?" Miriam had looked at the woman. Then she had looked at her husband, who was turned sideways in his chair laughing at something the dean had said. 6 years, Miriam said. "I've been here 6 years. The woman blinked. "Oh," she said. "I didn't know Edmund had." She stopped. Started again. "He never mentioned." Miriam picked up her spoon. "No," she said, "he doesn't." The marriage had been her mother's idea, which was not unusual for 1907, and not unusual for a family like the Calloways, who had name but very little left of anything else. Edmund Fitch was 34 to her 23, a physician attached to the medical faculty at Harwich University, and he had what her mother called a reliable future. He was not unkind, he was not cruel. He was simply, and this was the word Miriam would use later, turning it over like a stone in her hand, elsewhere. Elsewhere when she set the table for dinner. Elsewhere when she reorganized his correspondence by date and category, because otherwise the bills went unpaid and the invitations went unanswered. Elsewhere at the concerts she attended alone, and the church socials she navigated without him, making his apologies with the smooth ease of a woman who has practiced the art of covering for someone who does not know he needs covering. She had liked him in the beginning. That was the honest truth. He was intelligent and occasionally funny, and he cared deeply, in an abstract way, about medicine and about his students. He brought her books sometimes, leaving them on the kitchen table without a note, which she had found charming for approximately the first 2 years, and then simply strange. She had tried to tell him, once, about the strangeness, about the way their life felt like a house she was maintaining alone, room by room while he passed through it without noticing the walls. It was a Sunday in March, their 3rd year of marriage. She had planned what she wanted to say. She had chosen her words the way she chose her words for everything, carefully, with an awareness of how they might land. "Edmund," she had said, "I feel like I'm not sure you know I'm here." He had looked up from his journal. He had a way of looking at her when she spoke that was not unkind but was also not quite present, as if he was processing the words from a slight distance. "Of course I know you're here," he said. "I don't mean physically." "Then what do you mean?" She had tried to explain. She had used phrases like seen and acknowledged and part of things, and he had listened with the attentive, slightly puzzled expression he wore when a patient described a symptom he couldn't immediately categorize. When she finished, he had said, "I'm not sure what you want me to do differently," and she had realized, with a quiet and terrifying clarity, that he was not dismissing her. He genuinely did not know. She had let it go. This was her first mistake, though she would not fully understand it as a mistake until much later. The years accumulated the way they do when you are busy. She managed the household. She planned his schedule. She answered correspondence on his behalf when he was too distracted to answer it himself, which was most of the time. She attended faculty events as his wife, smiled at the right people, remembered the right names, smoothed the right conversations. She also quietly taught herself to read Latin, because she had always wanted to, and no one had ever told her she couldn't. She volunteered 3 mornings a week at the Women's Lending Library on Archer Street, cataloging donations and helping the librarian sort acquisitions. She befriended a woman named Vera, not the Vera in any of his circles, but a Vera of her own, a schoolteacher with opinions about everything, and a laugh like a door swinging open, and they took long walks on Saturday afternoons and talked about books and politics and what a life was supposed to amount to. She did not tell Edmund about the library, or about Vera, or about the Latin, not because she was hiding, but because she had stopped expecting him to ask. It was in their 5th year that she first began to understand what she was doing. She was sitting at his desk one afternoon, working through the paperwork for a grant application he had mentioned, offhandedly, needed to be submitted by Thursday. He had not asked her to do it. He had simply mentioned it, in the way he mentioned things he needed done, not as requests, but as facts he was releasing into the air, confident they would be taken care of. She was halfway through the 2nd page when she stopped and looked at her handwriting in the document. Dr. Edmund Fitch, in conjunction with the faculty of Harwich University Medical School, respectfully submits this application for the purpose of her handwriting, his name. She sat for a long time, not reading, just sitting. Then she finished the application, because it was due Thursday and she had said she would. Except that she hadn't, had she? She had never said anything. He had mentioned it, and she had taken it, and that was the transaction. That had always been the transaction. She mailed the application on Wednesday. The grant was awarded in February. She found out because she opened his mail. He never mentioned it to her. The faculty dinner in November was not the breaking point. She wanted to be precise about that later. It was not the thing that broke her. It was the thing that clarified her. There is a difference. She had returned home that night, hung up her coat, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold while she thought. Edmund came in 30 minutes behind her, moved through the kitchen to refill his flask from the cabinet, and said, "Good evening, wasn't it? Pemberton's got a lot to say about the new laboratory initiative." "The woman beside me didn't know I was your wife," Miriam said. Edmund paused. "Which woman?" "Professor Ashby's wife. She thought I was a visitor." "Ah," he recapped his flask. "She's fairly new to the faculty circle. Probably hasn't had reason to." "Edmund." Miriam set down her cup. "I have attended 17 faculty dinners. I have organized the last 4. I kept Professor Hadley from embarrassing himself at the Winter Symposium in 1903. I have sent your regrets to every invitation you couldn't be bothered to reply to for 6 years." She paused. "Why has no one ever heard of me?" He looked at her, genuinely, for perhaps the first time in a long while, looked at her and not through her or past her. "I don't," he started, stopped. "I suppose I didn't think to mention, for 6 years, Miriam. I'm not asking you to apologize," she said, and meant it. She was past apologies. She was into something colder and clearer than anger. "I'm asking you to explain how it's possible that the man I have kept a household for 6 years, has managed to conduct an entire professional life without mentioning that I exist." He had no answer for that. She had known he wouldn't. She finished her tea and went to bed. He came to bed an hour later and fell asleep quickly, the way he always did, and she lay in the dark and counted the years on her fingers and arrived at the same number she had started with. 6. She spent the next 4 months making arrangements. She did not do this dramatically. She did not weep, or confide in anyone, or draft letters of recrimination. She simply began. She wrote to her cousin Harriet, who had lived in Boston for the past decade and who had, on 2 separate occasions, suggested that Miriam come for a visit and never come back. She had a spare room, Harriet wrote back, and a friend who ran a small publishing house that was always in need of someone who could read Latin and knew how to organize things. Miriam read this letter 3 times and then folded it into her copy of Middlemarch, where Edmund would never find it. She opened a savings account at a bank on the other side of the city. She transferred money in careful, unremarkable amounts, over the course of 3 months, from the household account she managed. Not large sums. Nothing he would notice. She had been managing his money long enough to know what he looked at and what he didn't. She bought a train ticket for the 14th of March. One way. She told no one except Vera, who sat across from her at a tea shop on a Thursday afternoon, and listened without interrupting, which was saying something for Vera, and then said, "It's about time," with a conviction that Miriam found unexpectedly, made her eyes sting. "You think I'm right?" Miriam asked. "I think," Vera said carefully, "that I've watched you apologize for a man who didn't even know you were apologizing for him, for as long as I've known you. Whether that's right is a question for people who've never had to do it." She reached across the table and touched Miriam's hand once. "Go to Boston." On the evening of the 13th of March, Edmund came home at 7, which was early for him, and found Miriam in the kitchen finishing the dinner she had made. He sat down at the table. She served the meal. They talked about nothing, about his lecture schedule, about a paper he was revising, and she was present for all of it, because she had decided she would be. She was not cold. She was not distant. She ate her dinner, and she listened, and she asked him questions, and he answered them the way he always did, and she thought, this is what it always looked like, from outside, perfectly ordinary. She had made pot roast, which was his favorite. She had made it deliberately. Not out of sentiment, or perhaps out of something too complicated to call sentiment by that simple name. When she cleared the plates, he picked up the newspaper and moved to the sitting room, as he always did. She washed the dishes. She dried them. She set them back on their shelves in the order she had always kept them. Then, she went to the bedroom, where her trunk was packed and waiting, having been packed in pieces over the past 2 weeks, in the 20 minutes, each morning after Edmund left for the university. She carried it to the front hall. She put on her coat. She put on her hat. She wrote the letter, brief, clear, without cruelty, and folded it in thirds and set it beside his coffee cup for the morning. She sat back down at the dining table and ate the last of the apple cake she had made on Sunday. Then she picked up her trunk and let herself out the front door. It was cold. The street was quiet. The first light of a March morning was still 3 hours away, and the lampposts made yellow circles on the wet pavement. And Miriam Calloway walked 2 blocks to the corner and flagged down a cab and told the driver the name of the station. She did not look back at the house. Not because she was afraid of what she'd feel, but because there was nothing there, in that direction, that she hadn't already said goodbye to. Edmund found the letter at 7:14 in the morning. He read it standing in the kitchen in his dressing gown, and then he read it again sitting down, and then he sat for a long time without reading it at all. The letter said, in full, Edmund, I have taken what is mine and gone to Boston, to my cousin's house. I have left the household accounts in order. The Hendersons' dinner invitation for the 22nd still needs a reply. I have left their card on your desk. I wish you no harm. I hope you find someone who suits you better than I have evidently suited you. Miriam. He read the line about the Hendersons 3 times. Left their card on your desk. Even now. Even in leaving him, she had... He put the letter down. He sat in the kitchen for a long time. The coffee she had prepared the night before, set in the percolator for him to heat in the morning, began to go cold. He thought about the faculty dinner, about Professor Ashby's wife, about the 22 things he had needed done last month that had simply been done, by some mechanism he had never examined. He thought about the grant application. He thought about the mornings he had come downstairs to find the table laid and the correspondence sorted, and his schedule on the writing table by the door, and how he had never once, not once, stopped to ask her how she had known. He had thought, without ever fully thinking it, that this was simply what a house did, what a marriage did, that things ran because they ran, because the household was a piece of machinery that functioned correctly. He had not thought about who was running it. He went to his desk and found the Hendersons' card, exactly where she had said. He sat down heavily in his chair. He went to Boston in April. He did not go dramatically or desperately. He went the way Edmund Fitch did most things, with a sense of deliberate forward motion and a faint, uncomfortable awareness that he did not fully understand what he was doing or why. He had her cousin's address. He wrote ahead, which Harriet Calloway received with visible amusement and relayed to Miriam over the breakfast table, reading it aloud in the dry voice she used for all communications she found absurd. He says he would like to speak with you, Harriet said. He says he has, and I'm quoting, given the matter considerable thought. Miriam, who was reading a galley proof for the publishing house and had ink on her second finger, said, has he? He says he would also understand completely if you preferred he didn't come. Miriam turned a page. Tell him he can come if he likes. He came on a Thursday morning, and Harriet let him in with an expression that communicated, without words, exactly what she thought of him, and showed him to the small front parlor where Miriam was waiting. She looked different, or perhaps the same, but differently visible. She was wearing her hair in a simpler way. She had a book on her lap that she had clearly been reading and set aside, but without the performance of setting it aside. She just put it down, a real book with a real place in it, because she would go back to it after he left. That detail, more than anything, unsettled him. You look well, he said. I am well, she said. Sit down, Edmund. He sat. He had prepared what he wanted to say, and now, sitting across from her in Harriet's small parlor, with the March light coming through the curtains, he found that none of it was adequate. I owe you an apology, he said. I understand that. Which part are you apologizing for? He had not expected her to ask that. He had expected, he wasn't sure what, something softer. Some opening for him to say what he'd rehearsed. He looked at her and thought, not for the first time, that he had not actually known what she was like. He had known that she was there. He had known that she managed things. But he had not known that she would ask the specific, cutting question, or that she would sit there so simply, so without performance, and wait for him to answer it. All of it, he said. 6 years of it. Can you be more specific? He took a breath. The dinner, he said. Not just the dinner. But the way she didn't know who you were. The way I had never made certain she would know. Made certain any of them would know. He stopped. I told Pemberton on Friday that my wife had gone to Boston to visit her cousin, and he said he didn't know I was married, and I stood there and I couldn't explain it. How someone I've worked alongside for 4 years didn't know. He paused again. I couldn't explain it because I didn't understand it myself. Miriam was quiet for a moment. And do you now? I think, he said slowly, that I have spent my life moving through it, expecting it to hold still for me. expecting the pieces to be in place without my having to place them. He looked at her. I don't know when it started. I think it started long before you. That's probably true, she said. That doesn't. I know it doesn't make it better. I wasn't saying it to make it better. He sat with that. What did you want? He asked after a while. What did you want when you said those things in the third year? What were you hoping I'd say? Miriam thought about it honestly. I wanted you to say that you'd noticed, she said. Even just that, not fixed, not solved. Just noticed that I was there. That something I did or said had landed, somewhere, in your awareness. She tilted her head slightly. You asked me what I wanted you to do differently. I didn't want you to do differently. I wanted you to see. He was quiet for a long time. I see you now, he said. I'm aware that's too late. It may be, she said. I won't pretend otherwise. She did not go back to Harwick with him. He had not expected her to, though some part of him had hoped it, in the way a man hopes for things he hasn't earned. She was working. She was genuinely, visibly working. The proofreading, the cataloging, the mornings at the publishing house, where her opinion on whether a sentence was clear was asked and valued and sometimes acted upon. She had enrolled in a lecture series at a women's college nearby, and came home from it, flushed and argumentative, in a way he had never once, in 6 years, seen her be. She was not happy in the simple sense, but she was present in a way she had never been in their house. In a way he understood now. He had never given her space to be. He stayed 3 days. On the last evening, they walked along the river and talked the way they had not talked in years, which was to say honestly, which was to say with the awareness that the other person might disagree. She told him about the Latin. He was silent for a moment and then said, Why didn't you tell me? She said, Because you didn't ask. He said, That's not an answer. She said, No, it's a symptom. He laughed, short and without humor. Of what? Of the fact that we stopped being curious about each other, somewhere in the 2nd year, and I'm not entirely sure which of us stopped first. He thought about that all the way back to his hotel. He thought about it on the train home. He thought about it for a long time after, in the house that was very quiet now, where he laid his own correspondence out in the morning and discovered that he didn't know where anything was supposed to go. In June he wrote to her, not to ask her to come back, to tell her that he had told the department chairman that his wife was in Boston working at a publishing house, and that the chairmans had said, a publishing house. Edmund, I didn't know she was in the trade, and he had said, she wasn't before, and the chairman had seemed impressed, which Edmund had found unexpectedly made him proud. He wrote, I told him your name. Miriam read this letter at the breakfast table, while Harriet observed from behind her own cup of coffee. From him? Harriet asked. Yes, and? Miriam folded it carefully and set it beside her plate. He told someone my name, she said. Harriet considered this. That's a very low bar. It is, Miriam agreed, but it's the first time. She wrote back, not to say she was coming home. She was not ready to say that, and honesty mattered to her in a way it hadn't always been permitted to before. She wrote to tell him that the publishing house had asked her to take on a small editorial project. Nothing large, a collection of short scientific essays, and that her work had been useful and that she was glad to be doing something that was, in the most direct sense, hers. She wrote, I'm glad you told them. She did not know what would happen next. She thought that was probably the first true thing about her situation, since she had walked out the door on a cold March morning, with a trunk and a train ticket, and the folded letter of someone who had finally found the shape of her own life. She did not know if Edmund would become the man he was trying to be. She did not know if that man, if he became him, would be someone she could stand beside. She knew that she had learned to ask for what she needed. Finally, by the very blunt method of removing herself from the situation where she couldn't get it. She knew that she had Latin, and Vera's letters, and a desk at the publishing house that was hers, and a room in Harriet's house, where no one expected anything of her that she hadn't agreed to give. She picked up her pen. Outside the window, the city moved in its ordinary way, cabs and streetcars and a vendor selling papers on the corner, and Miriam Calloway, who had folded a letter and set it beside a coffee cup and finished her dinner before she left, sat in a pool of early summer light and wrote back to the man who had not known she existed, and thought that it was possible, just barely possible, that knowing was a beginning. Not a guarantee, not a resolution, a beginning.